Hello, everybody. I'm Matthew Faraci, and welcome to Peace and Power Israel, the podcast from Federal Newswire. Today, we are joined by, in my view, a legend in Israel. Whether Gadi will accept that encomium is up to him. But an author, a writer, speaker, thinker. If there are poignant thoughts coming out of Israel, you've probably something came from a journalist, obviously. Gadi has a very well-known podcast called Israel Update, where they cover all kinds of these sorts of things. If you want to get the real inside sort of hardball on Israeli politics, that's him. Comes to America quite a bit to speak at the Hudson Institute and other places. So, Gadi, it is my great honor to have you here today.
A pleasure. What a lovely introduction. You should come with me to dates.
I'll come up with some theme music too, okay? So when you walk away. So, Gadi, as you know, this is a podcast about the U.S. Israel alliance, and the U.S. Israel alliance has been all over the headlines for the last week. And the number one headline is, and so I'm going to start with the hardball right out of the gate. Trump comes to the Middle East, doesn't come to Israel. Then, as at least at the time of this recording, J.D. Vance rumored to come to Israel, and then that also gets canceled. I want to turn this around, not from the American perspective, but 180 degrees from the Israeli perspective. How is the prime minister, the Israeli society, how is this all being viewed? How did we see the Trump trip from the Israeli perspective?
It's very worrying. Israel feels that Trump may have just turned his back on us, or that's the question everybody asks. Has he turned his back on us? We can try to understand what and why, but it began, with the Houthis. He made a deal with the Houthis, which excluded shooting at Israel. That is, the Houthis got a threat from the United States to halt all fire except if they continue firing at Israel. So that was a very worrying sign that Trump is ready to leave us in the lurch. And then came the two other tracks that caused concern. His deals in the making with the Sunnis, the Gulf Sunni states, and then the negotiations with Iran. On the positive side, we heard from Witkoff, who is considered here the dovish side or the softer side towards Iran, that still the red line is enriching uranium. There would be no enriching uranium, he said, even not to 1% on Iranian soil or by the Iranians. And that's good news if they stick to the red lines. However, there were other rumors saying that both the Iranians, and the Americans are looking for some formula by which both could say they were satisfied, and which will enable Iran to preserve at least some capability or an easy path to renewing its capability of enrichment on Iranian soil. And Israelis are very wary of Iranian negotiating style. Iranians are very devious, very patient, and very bold in their negotiations. They have no qualms about cheating. When I interviewed Prime Minister Netanyahu, and I asked him, if Trump gets a deal which will include the complete dismantling of all centrifuges on Iranian soil, would that be a good equivalent to a raid and an attack on these nuclear facilities? And he paused, and then he said, do you trust the Iranians? So I guess what Israelis are asking themselves is, will the Iranians be able to cheat Trump? Or will Trump in the end give way at the expense of the future security of the whole region? So we don't have an answer to that, regrettably. The Iranians are very good at cheating, but you also need to factor in that Obama was willing to be cheated. In fact, Obama participated in the cheating, and that does not seem to be what Trump is doing. So I'd say the best interpretation of this most worrying of the three tracks, I didn't mention Gaza yet, that's the third arena, but the most worrying is Iran. And the question is, will the Americans abide by their red lines? The most generous interpretation is that Trump is really on it, and there will be a very harsh agreement. And this is setting up Iran for the first attempt to cheat, and which will give the Trump administration a proper excuse to turn on Iran with military force.
I heard from some Knesset members, Gadi, the concern was framed in a way that was I had not heard before, and it was framed like this: that the U.S. negotiating directly with Iran gave permission to other bad actors in the region who had not fully engaged with Iran to start doing so. The example I was given was that the Russians were looking at signing some kind of an agreement with Iran. They were afraid to do so. When America started talking to Iran directly, they said, oh, okay. And what I was also told, confidentially, so I don't want to reveal the source, but I was also told that Saudi Arabia and some of the other countries, the very countries that the president just went to visit, also started to open engagement with Iran because, again, if America's talking to them, we can talk to them. Have you heard anything to that effect?
I haven't heard anything directly, but it makes sense. And if you combine this with the other side of the equation, the at least the appearance of turning his back on Israel, then the whole alliance system is shifting, because people or countries generally viewed the alliance between America and Israel to be tight, and assumed there was coordination. But now that Trump at least gave the appearance that he's snubbing Israel and not considering our interests, then other actors in the region, if they saw the region in two poles, one that America favored Israel and one that America opposed stringently, then the combination of America negotiating directly with Iran with its back to Israel gives a signal that it's not as dangerous as before to approach the Iran and the Iranian axis, behind which is Russia and then China.
So, Gadi, do you, from the Israeli perspective, do you believe that the media narratives about a rift between Trump and Bibi is fake news, or do you think there's something to it? You're kind of the top guy in Israel reading the tea leaves. When you read the tea leaves, what is your current analysis?
I don't know, because whenever people ask these questions, they ask them of political analysts, and also I'm a historian of the United States. I tell them that I know a lot about the United States, but that is no preparation for understanding the Trumpian psychology. So I can only see what experience teaches about Trump, that he always offers a olive branch and a grenade, and he can veer one way or the other, whether it's technique or temperament or both, technique of negotiations. But certainly this was a very surprising turn of events. I don't see any grounds for excluding the harsh unpleasant interpretation. So I don't think that I can say that's fake news, although I have no direct information about what is going on behind the scenes. What I wrote to an Israeli public is that, and what the government seems to be doing now, is that given these circumstances, we need to move directly to occupy the whole of the Gaza Strip, because there is no way to root out Hamas except by fully occupying the strip and rooting it out. You can't do it from the outside. You can't have intermediary forces doing it. No one will do it if the IDF does not do it. And one of the things we are worried about is that the Saudis would have their way, which means they will have a grand deal over our heads, which includes at least a path to a Palestinian state. We need to block that path. It cannot be, from Israel's perspective, that the Nazis who raped, killed, and burned families alive, dismembered children for fun in front of their parents. We cannot let these people continue to rule Gaza, whether directly or under some other guise that will satisfy the Saudis. So there cannot be another Nazi state on our border, and we need to establish facts on the ground before Trump's patience runs out. The Israeli government apparently did not read the overt side of Trump's policy, which he kept saying. He kept saying he wants this war over. So he gave us the weapons and the backing to do it. We still hoped for a hostage deal. Israel is very sensitive about the hostages. I wish it would not externalize its pain so vividly, because sometimes you need to bite your lips and not show how painful this is for you, because externalizing the pain only encouraged our enemies, and they dangled a deal before our eyes. It was also an American demand, the Witkoff plan, and we hesitated and procrastinated, and now the window of opportunity may be closing. It may be that soon Trump will give us an ultimatum, and we need to be ready for that eventuality with boots on the ground in Gaza.
I do want to get back to Gaza, but I want to follow up with this question, Gadi, because one of the things that I observed in this whole week of diplomacy that the president was conducting was that he did ask each of the places that he visited to join the Abraham Accords. And now there wasn't a demand. It was a polite ask, especially in Saudi Arabia. He actually said in so many words, it'd be a personal favor to me if you would join the Abraham Accords. So while he didn't visit Israel, he was certainly joining the Abraham Accords is advocating for Israel, is it not?
And not if the price is a Palestinian state, and that was the Saudi demand. If I look at this from Trump's side, then he may think, here I'm offering Israel more peace deals, and what they need to agree to is some path to a Palestinian state. Then that is not a price worth for us. A Palestinian state, for Netanyahu's two life's missions were to prevent the establishment of a Palestinian state and to dismantle the Iranian military nuclear program. These are his life's missions. And so if you want to give formal peace with Saudi Arabia, even with some economic benefits, that is not a price worth paying for a path to another Hamastan on our border.
Okay, so from the Israeli perspective, are there positive developments that came from the president's trip to the Middle East? Is there anything that stuck out that Israelis looked at and said, "Oh, okay, well that's a good thing"?
Well, if there would be a total dismantling of the Iranian nuclear program, and if America insists on its red lines, then that is certainly good news. There may be more good news in Syria or bad news in Syria. We don't know, because the American, I think what Trump is doing is not wise from an American perspective, because America has a system of alliances in the Middle East. It leans on Egypt, the Sunni states in the Gulf, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, regrettably also Qatar, Turkey, and Israel. And within that system of alliances, there are great tensions between Israel and Saudi Arabia, between Israel and Egypt, between Israel and Turkey, and this is a complicated juggling act. However, it is possible, because the choices are, if you look at recent history, Obama chose to turn his back on this alliance system and join, basically, and at least empower the Iranian axis. He stuck a finger in Turkey's eye in North Syria by supporting the PKK, and he certainly stuck a finger in Israel's eye by the very fact of the JCPOA, that terrible deal which gave Iran permission to enrich uranium and basically gave it a path to a nuclear weapon. And he also turned his back on Saudi Arabia. And so this continued in the third Obama administration, also known as the Biden administration, where the first thing they did is stick a finger in the eye of the Saudis by taking the Houthis out of the list of terror organizations. And they did the same to Israel, the Biden administration did, by signaling to Hezbollah, like they signaled to Iran in the arena of the Red Sea, when they said, we're pulling away from Saudi Arabia and winking in the direction of the Houthis. They did the same to Israel. They turned their backs on Israel in the north and gave territorial water to Lebanon, basically to Hezbollah, signaling to Iran, we will appease you here. As we appeased you in the Red Sea, we will appease you in the Mediterranean. So what the Obama administration did was move away from its allies, its friends, and reach out to its enemies, and appeasing Iran, opening the door for a flow of money by not imposing the sanctions. We're talking about at least $100 billion to the Iranian coffers. And then there's the Trump administration, which we learned in the first round.
Wait, I need to interrupt you really quickly. Why?
Yeah.
Why?
Why what?
When you're talking about the three Obama administrations, if we will, why did they make this choice, in your view?
Because their conception was that they can achieve a new balance in the Middle East. If Iran is not pressured and cornered, it will, they assume, become less violent. You remember that Obama is a social organizer from Chicago. So you hug the thug, and then he is less angry. So the whole thing, you could see it from the first minute when he went to Cairo. He also skipped Israel in that visit. He went to Cairo and gave that speech in 2009, basically bowing down and apologizing before the Muslim world for Western sins. So this is a post-colonial friend of mine, but also remember that this is seated on the traditional State Department view, which said that backing Israel is backing the wrong horse in the Middle East, and that this causes Arab anger, and therefore it's better to move towards the Arab radicals, which they did. Eisenhower did the same thing when he tried to appease Nasser in order to put some daylight between him and the Soviets. But we should say in Eisenhower's favor that he realized that trying to appease the most radical element in the Arab world was a mistake, and he corrected it. Obama did not correct it, and he kept trying to appease the Iranians, and they kept lighting up the Middle East. And so both administrations wanted to avoid American boots on the ground. Obama's philosophy said, get away from your allies, reach out to your enemies, and make America the honest broker or the balancer, which would guarantee a new balance in the Middle East, achieved by giving Iran a stake in the game. That was the philosophy. They had a name for it. They called it regional integration. Who do you need to integrate except Iran? Everyone else is integrated unless you want to integrate Israel. And so that was the Obama philosophy. The Trump philosophy was, no, we will back our allies and corner our enemies. And that's what they did in the first administration, by a very tight regime of sanctions, by taking down Qasem Soleimani, the architect of the Iranian proxy system, and by backing Israel. Absolutely. Backing Israel's demand for sovereignty in the Golan Heights, transferring the American embassy to Jerusalem, sponsoring the Abraham Accords, pulling out of the JCPOA. All these moves signaled to the Iranians that Trump is out to corner them and to prevent their rise to hegemony in the region. And so this is very confusing now, because now he's reaching out to them. But if you look back, didn't he do the same thing with Kim Jong-un? Didn't everybody think that he was going to open a new world war? And then he said that Kim Jong-un is his best friend. So what the long-term consequences of this trip would be, we still don't know. But it may be a reshuffling of the old policy and the new political order in the region.
As I'm thinking through this, can you help us, Gadi, understand to the best of your ability, what would the prime minister's perspective on this be, or also what options are available to the prime minister in this moment vis-a-vis the U.S. alliance? I mean, we know he made 2 visits already, which is a lot. It's more than any other world leader has had the opportunity. Yeah, shed some light on that if you could.
Yeah, so it was always Benjamin Netanyahu's view that Israel is not a vassal state. It should respect the alliance. It should retain the friendship with the United States. It shares its values, but Israel will take care of its existential interests according to its own judgment. And therefore, there were quite a few times when Netanyahu directly defied what seemed to be American directives, not even advice. And he did it in a very calculated way. The Biden administration tried to stop the war in Gaza, and certainly wanted to prevent it from seeping into Lebanon. But Netanyahu systematically taught our enemies that they cannot count on American red lines to hide behind, because if they hurt Israel, Israel may modify its behavior according to American requests, but it would not. But no one can assume that we take orders from Washington, because the minute we do, no one will negotiate with us or conduct a policy vis-a-vis Jerusalem. Everyone will just look to Washington. You know, it's like a child going to daddy. And so the further negotiations are going to be with daddy, not with a child. And we can't behave like this. But when you do this vis-a-vis the Biden administration, and you can count on Republican support, it's not the same thing as when you need to conduct that policy vis-a-vis a Republican president with a increasingly hostile Democratic Party on the other side of the aisle. So obviously the situation is more complicated now, but I think that one version or another of that policy would be implemented. I don't think when there's a negotiations going on between the the Trump administration and Iran, I don't think that Israel would venture spoiling them or sabotaging them with a direct attack on a scale that could start a war. But certainly there have been some strange fires in Iran recently, and they are not, to the extent that Israel is responsible for them. I have no such positive information, but to the extent that Israel is, it may be signaling to Iran that the long game is we are still out for an opportunity to take out your nuclear program, regardless of your bilateral relations with the United States. So one possibility, which my colleague Mike Duran on our podcast Israel Update mentioned, is Israel may want to attack the factories where they manufacture the long-range ballistic missiles, which can carry nuclear weapons all the way to Israel and also to Europe, possibly. So Israel might do something like that. It might wait things out, but it would need to maneuver in such a way that does not break the relationship, obviously, that takes into account our dependence, but also reminds the United States of our utility. At the moment, this is the weakest side. I think we may have taken for granted the fact that we are useful to the United States. I think that once this trip is over and the dust settles or the consequences begin to be felt, I think it's the objective interest of the United States to strengthen the alliance with Israel, because it's one of the legs it's leaning on in the Middle East, and I think we are objectively useful to the American system of alliance. And apart from demonstrating that we will retain some wiggle room, then we should also remind the Trump administration of the utility of this alliance. And as I said in the beginning, the first thing to do is no one is currently standing in the way of our Gaza policy, and except for minor adjustments regarding humanitarian aid, I think Israel should move full force ahead by establishing control of the Gaza Strip.
Just to key in on something you said about 45 seconds ago, the Prime Minister announced last week that it is his desire that Israel would become militarily independent, and that that just as Israel no longer receives foreign aid from the United States, that it would be his desire that Israel would no longer receive military assistance from the United States. Does that tie in with what you've been talking about?
I think that begins before Trump. This is the lesson of this war from the very beginning. The embargo on weapons, which the Biden administration employed, was very painful for us. It also set the limit to the possibilities of defying Biden's horrendous policy. The appeasement of Iran was an existential danger, and Netanyahu, in that respect, achieved something that would, it's a rare achievement. Vis-a-vis American resistance to the continuation of the war, he managed not just to perpetuate it, which we needed to do because we need to finish the job. He also managed to augment the war so that it would spill into Lebanon in a way that the Biden administration could not publicly oppose, because taking out Nasrallah, he's wanted by the Americans. He has American blood up to his elbows. And it was hard for the American administration to say anything against that. And then that led to the collapse of the Bashar Assad regime and Iran's hold in Syria. And then Israel took out the whole of the Syrian army, or most of its equipment, and neutralized a great danger there, and then basically took the wars to the outskirts of Iran. But all through that time, Netanyahu had the delicate maneuver where at any time the Americans could step on our oxygen supply, which is the ammunition, without which we can't carry out the war. And it's not a good thing for an ally to be completely dependent on the other partner, so that the other partner has a veto over our policy. That's not what we want. I think we need to diversify our sources of military equipment. I think we need to go ahead and develop some systems with India, for example. And I think that we would be useful to the American system of alliance if we are independent. And that's a hard argument to make. But listen, Matthew, I think the reason that we managed to pull out, that Trump and Netanyahu managed to pull out the achievement of the Abraham Accords was because the Arabs trusted Netanyahu, or at least appreciated his strength after he defied Obama. When Netanyahu went to give a speech over and against Obama's objection to the joint session of the two houses of Congress, when he did that, he signaled to the Arabs that Israel is an independent, strong player in the Middle East, and that it would take care of its interests. And therefore, they were more hospitable to the idea of an alliance with Israel, because their fears were also Iran. So Saudi Arabia fears Iran more than it fears Israel, certainly, and more than it cares about the Palestinians. And so Netanyahu demonstrated to them that Israel is a bold and strong actor. So when Trump was willing to put America behind that alliance, it became a more potent brew. But when Biden pulled the plug on that alliance, the system of the Abraham Accords, I don't want to say fell apart, but lost a lot of its vitality.
So I think, Gadi, that one of the reasons, you and I were talking about this a little bit before the show, one of the reasons that people in Israel are concerned is because the difference between the first Trump and the second Trump administration, you've got the same president, smart, even smarter and more savvy now because of the things he experienced in the offseason, but you have an increasingly isolationist wing of the Republican Party, which is most famously led by Tucker Carlson and viewed, although it's now reported, that J.D. Vance is part of that group. I don't have a view on whether that is true or not true, but I wanted to ask you, is that a factor in, first of all, is that something that Israelis are aware of? How does that factor into thinking vis-a-vis the way that Israel looks at America?
Israelis are very aware of it because isolationism very easily seeps into anti-Semitism, and not for the first time, because the Tucker Carlson version of anti-Semitism and of isolationism also gives in easily to the idea that it's always the Jews that are dragging us to wars. And as I said, this has deep roots in a State Department traditional policy saying it's not good to back Israel because that is what drags America into regional wars. And that is just not true, because the American interest is not to have a nuclear Iran. A nuclear Iran is going to wreak havoc on the world order that is basically a Pax Americana, basically an American led. So imagine that China has a mad dog with a nuclear bomb on a leash. That is incredibly dangerous to the world order. But according to the Tucker Carlsons, we live in the 19th century, and the two oceans and Canada and Mexico, they protect the United States. So it's always the Jews. The Jews are dragging us into wars. And then he brings nutcases like Martyr Maid, Daryl Cooper, to his show, who is a quack historian who still can't figure out who was the good guy in World War II. In fact, he knows that Churchill was the bad guy because he dragged America into a war. Why did he do that? Because of the Jewish financiers. So it's very easy to seduce isolationists by saying, we don't need these wars. We don't have an actual interest. It's someone is dragging us there. And then the Jews are, the usual suspect for that kind of narrative. And when you look at Tucker Carlson is a straight out anti-Semite now. It's the things, the conspiracy theories, the lies. I remember it just blew in my face when he said that there were Christians in Bethlehem, but after 70 something years of Israeli rule, almost none of them are there, which is, it's a bold lie in your face, because the Christians were fine in Bethlehem until Arafat and the PLO took over with the Palestinian Authority. And then we know what happens to minorities under Arab regimes, and the Christians were no different. So once he began to spin that lie and refused to apologize for it and so forth, you could understand that this is sinister. He's not an accidental anti-Semite. This is deliberate, conscious, systematic anti-Semitism. And the fact that he's foaming in the mouth less than Candace Owens doesn't make it any less sinister. So if you hear that he has J.D. Vance's ear, then this is very worrying, because this streak in American on the American right is not that far from woke Obama philosophy, because in the end, it's Israel's fault that the Iranians are angry. And we have no quarrel with the Iranians. Why are the Iranians burning the American flag? Why do they call Israel the little devil and America the big devil? That's because of Israel. Obviously, there is some serious problem there. And Benjamin Netanyahu, when he came to Congress, had to fight this worldview. And maybe I should add a layer and say that woke anti-Semitism, and which you see in academia for, I don't know, when was Orientalism published by Edward Said? 1978. So ever since then, you see woke anti-Semitism, and then woke MAGA or woke isolationism, and they mesh together to the same policy, which means we have no quarrel with Iran. What's the problem with Iran? We should make peace with Iran. And then you see that quack Daryl Cooper coming and saying that the real problem in the Middle East is Israel, and America should join all the Arab countries together. He doesn't know anything about Arab or Muslim history, so he doesn't know that it's not that easy to join the Shiites and the Sunnis or the rest of this very intricate tapestry of sects in the region, and then they all should create an alliance. And if Israel does not bow its head to this alliance and allow a Palestinian state, then military power should be used against Israel. So you understand that these people have gone far enough to make Israel the enemy in the Middle East, not the. And this is crazy. And it's coming from a guy who's trying to exonerate Hitler and now trying to reward the jihadi Nazis of Hamas for attempting another genocide at Jews. So obviously, if you're an Israeli Jew, that is very worrying. And I would say, Matthew, or you tell me, if you're an American Jew, that is rather worrying.
Well, Gadi, let me just ask this. You made an excellent point that I wanted to follow up on. To those that say that Iran is a threat to Israel, but not a threat to the United States, and that's a very pervasive argument right now in America, how do you respond to that?
Well, first of all, the American public does not like Iran. Iran has been trying to murder the candidate for presidency, who is now the president. Its jihadi ideology is not something that you can appease. But in terms of realpolitik, strict realpolitik of the Middle East, if Iran gets more power, or certainly the bomb, it would start a nuclear arms race in this region. And then what? You have enough crazies here. Do you want an Al-Qaeda with a nuclear bomb next? So when Obama looked at the region, what he did was say, look, ISIS is the enemy and Iran is our friend. So basically Iran's proxies were the boots on the ground against ISIS. So if ISIS is dangerous, is not an ISIS with a state and a nuclear program dangerous? Of course it's dangerous. It's dangerous. Look, if they could deliver a nuclear bomb to the Twin Towers back then, they would have. And they will if someday they can. And you say, oh, that's suicide because America is so much more powerful. Well, if you believe that for killing infidels, you reach heaven and then you get 72 virgins, then I don't know what you do with 72 virgins. But if you believe that this is the most wonderful thing that God will reward you for, then you are not scared of death. We saw that Hamas were not scared of death. They're not scared of using their own population as human shields because they all go to heaven. And that's fine. So if you think that these crazies, they or some other new Al-Qaeda or some other new ISIS would join the nuclear arms race and that would not influence America, then you're dreaming. But what about just a small nuclear war in the Middle East? Would that not be enough to wreck the whole system of alliances that America has worked on ever since World War II? So I don't think anyone in his right mind would risk a nuclear Iran or even a very powerful Iran. But also, philosophically speaking, because what woke academia did in its ever since, I guess, the 60s and up to now was work on a narrative in which Zionism was the rear guard action of a retrograde, inferior, colonial, imperial, Western racist philosophy. So we are the last vestige of colonialism, and in order to make peace with a well-meaning Arab world, we should eliminate Israel. That's what you teach in universities. That's the basic view of post-colonial studies, right? And what Netanyahu tried to do in Congress is say it's the other way around. This is not the rear guard action of colonialism. This is the avant-garde. This is the front line of a war between civilization and barbarism. And these are barbarians. These are the new Nazis. Iran is the new Nazis. It has a genocidal ideology, like the Nazis did. It is not a coincidence that the Mufti in Jerusalem was a friend of Hitler's. And it's not a coincidence that Khamenei is the heir of violent genocidal anti-Semitism. And so, but this is directed against the West. The Jews are just the front line, and Israel and Zionism are the front line. We are fighting barbarism. And this is also a test case. Can civilized nations defend themselves against barbarians? Or will they succumb to the propaganda that tries to pin all these civilian deaths on Israel? All these civilian deaths are, all of them, on Hamas. Hamas can lay down its arms at any minute and return the hostages, and this will stop. Hamas is deliberately putting its women and children in harm's way as human shields. Israel is doing its best not to hurt civilians. It's succeeding because the ratio of civilian death to combatant deaths is unprecedented in modern urban warfare.
But you're never going to hear that headline. You will never hear that headline reported in the press. Right?
Of course not, because the press is because the press is all post-colonial and it's all leftist. And let me point out what this means, Matthew. If a country should lay down its arms when terrorists are hiding behind women and children, then the terrorists will not just win this war, they will win any future war. So we do not want to kill women and children. Of course, the numbers are inflated. It's Hamas, everything, but they're putting citizens in harm's way. But if they think that this will protect them and enable them to burn our families alive, then they are wrong. And Israel should go ahead in the face of resistance, because we are on the moral side here. And it is immoral to demand a country to surrender because Nazis are hiding behind children. No, we will get these Nazis, whatever it takes. We will get them.
Gadi,
can you imagine, Matthew?
Yeah.
Surrendering before, and I'm saying this to my Israeli colleagues as well. We're saying no because of the hostages. No, these are not their deaths. These are our civilian deaths. And would it be reasonable, do you think, to say, stop the Allies from crushing Nazi Germany because there are still some Jews who can be saved? No one, no Jew in World War II would say, "Oh, for liberating Auschwitz, we will demand cessation of hostilities." No, these civilization must stand against barbarism and not give barbarism a way to neutralize our immune system by pushing their own women and children in harm's way. Again, we should avoid as much as possible. But after we give proper warning, any Hamas terrorist we will find you and kill you, even if you try to hide behind human shields.
Gadi, let me ask you this one last question. We've talked about a lot of tough stuff today. I kind of felt like, we've sat the family down and had a intervention, if you will, just for a moment, not knowing where things are going totally, but had a tough conversation. What is your hope when you've talked about nothing less than the future of Western civilization? As you look at everything, what makes you hopeful about the U.S. Israel alliance as it stands today?
Oh, I think that sooner or later, other countries are going to wake up to this. And America had better wake up. My friend Yigal Carmon, who is the president of MEMRI, the Middle Eastern Media Research Institute, compiled a whole file of imam mosque sermons in North America that he took down from the web, from YouTube. And about 95% of them were anti-Semitic, many of them violently so, directly calling for violence against Jews. And if you keep ignoring this because you're afraid to be called an Islamophobe, Islamophobia, said one of my favorite commentators in America, Andrew McCarty. He said, Islamophobia is not a phobia. It is a term invented by the Muslim Brotherhood to discourage inquiry into Sharia supremacy philosophy. And that's what it is. So you have You have racism growing in your backyard, and it's protected in the name of anti-racism. So it's racist to say anything bad about Muslims, even if some Muslims, and I'm not saying all Muslims, but the ones who are recorded by Yigal Carmon are racist, and that's 95% of his sample. So what do you think is going to happen in a generation or two? They are not just anti-Semitic. They're anti-Western, they're anti-gay, they're anti-women's rights. And if you let that grow in your backyard, at one point you will pay the price. Ask the Europeans. Ask what happens to women in Neukölln, in Berlin. Ask what is happening to women in Saint-Denis in Paris. Ask what happens to women and Jews and gays in Malmö, in Sweden. Some of these places are no longer accessible to the police. They are independently ruled by Sharia law. And these people, they don't hate only Muslims and women and Jews. They are radically anti-Western civilization. So if you don't understand that Israel is now fighting an anti-Western philosophy, an anti-Western ideology, then this will bite you in your own country eventually. And again, I'm not saying all Muslims, I'm not saying all Arabs, but weed out all this jihadi, anti-gay, anti-women, anti-Semitic philosophy, or it will grow in your backyard. And America had better wake up. So when Netanyahu is giving a speech saying we are the front line in the same war against the people who murdered journalists in Paris, against the people who murdered gay director Theo van Gogh in Amsterdam. We are the front line in the war against people who perform female genital mutilation. It's called circumcision. It's not circumcision. It's a horrendous form of abuse. And if you don't understand that this is what at stake, then you may find out at a much higher price later.
Gadi, thank you for your time today. It's listening to you talk. I've learned a lot, and I would ask that you would consider coming back at some point during the next big set of headlines. We can check in again on this.
It would be a delight. Thank you very much for having me, Matthew.